Hi, this is Suzanne. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I can hear you, Suzanne.
Oh,
Yep.
great. Thanks. It was very quiet. I know Cameron is chairing this meeting, and I think he's on. Cameron?
Hi, yes, I'm on, thanks. All right, let's, it looks like the recording is started, so let's call this meeting to order at 1:03. Today is Tuesday, June 17th. This is the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee. Let's start with a roll call, please.
One quick correction, it's Thursday, June 17th.
Oh, thank you, sorry about that.
No problem. Miss Allard,
Here.
Mr. Constant, Mr. Dunbar,
Here.
Miss Kennedy,
Here.
Ms. LaFrance,
Here.
Mr. Presverdia,
Here.
Mr. Peterson,
Present.
Mr. Rivera,
Present.
Mr. Weddleton,
Here.
and Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
Do you have a quorum?
Thank you. All right. Well, as normal, if you want to get into the queue, just go into chat or send me a text. And let's start with new business. And we have a report from the Budget Advisory Commission. I believe Jonathan King, are you going to report for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am. The Budget Advisory Commission met on June 10th, so exactly a week ago. And what we considered during our time together were the selection of the chair and vice chair. But given that our current chair was taking a break for the meeting due to the birth of a new child, we moved that to our next meeting in July. Then we heard informational reports from the Assembly, the school district, and OMB. There's a lot of discussion around both the year-end fiscal situation for the district and the municipality as a whole, as well as discussion around the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding for the school district, and the draft 2021 first quarter budget to actuals for the municipality. We then had open discussion within the members, primarily focused on this, the state of the economy and the state of the municipality as a whole, as well as the distribution of the ARPA funds and the process the Assembly was using for the ARPA funds. And any remaining time we've spent really talking about continuing what we feel is a successful structure as we get ready for the mayoral transition. I'm happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair, if there are any.
Cameron, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't see any questions at this time. Thank you, Jonathan, for your report. We're going to move on now. Lance, are you doing this, or who's doing the report, the 2021 American Recovery Act plan?
I can start it. I know that there'll probably be some others weighing in here. I will say that through the Assembly approved, this is Lance Wilder, Director of Office of Management Budget. The Assembly has approved the appropriation when received of $51 million, a little more than $51 million in ARPA funds. That's half of the 103 in total the municipality will receive over the coming years. The first half of the 51 million, a little more than 23 million, those dollars have been received. They are into our account. The budget has been loaded, and then projects are currently, contracts are being let, and projects are being started. If individual Assembly members have particular interest on any one of those, if you just want to reach out to us and we will give you the status on those. That actually has begun in earnest as of what's today, Thursday, as of Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday. So the dollars are right now starting to get out the door, contracts being established where necessary. The second half of the 51 million, maybe Mr. Slifko or Mr. Bach, instead, if they're online, they can remind me. I think those dollars are anticipated or have been received very soon. So that is kind of the status of the American Rescue Plan. And we are using the Assembly's approved resolution on the allocation of those funds to those particular dollar amounts. So that is that's what I have to report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Lance. And just want to name for the record that Ms. Allard has joined us. Do we have anybody else from the administration who'd like to weigh in on these funds?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Jason Bach. I'd just add a few additional comments onto what Mr. Wilbur said. We have received the entire first half amount, both the city and county allocation. And we're in the process, as Mr. Wilbur said, we have loaded everything into SAP in our back end, and we are in the process of getting signed grant agreements with each and every one of the recipients of the funds as we speak. So I would anticipate that over the next several weeks, we will have all of those, and we will have pushed out the vast majority of this first $51 million out into their intended purpose that was ultimately approved by the Assembly.
Thank you, Jason. It doesn't appear I have any questions at this time. Anything else on that, Jason, or we have you just move on to item C? It looks like you're queued up for that. AR 2021-204.
Through the chair, this is Alex Slifka. I'll save Jason from that. This is an item that is on the agenda for the 22nd meeting, and just wanted to be available to answer any questions. This is just cleanup of some CARES funds that got moved into the general fund, and the big chunk of this stuff was actually spent in 2021, not 2020, which is why we're coming back to make what is, if you read the AM, listed as an accounting adjustment. So happy to answer any questions if they exist.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the members on that item? Looks like, yes, Mr. Weddleton.
So we allocated 12 million for buying 3 buildings. We haven't bought any. How much is left?
I think you have an item on the agenda to allocate 750,000 of that. So if you pass that item on Tuesday, you will have 11,250,000.
Okay.
That's actually not quite accurate. Let me jump in. There has been funds that have been expended out of that for all of the due diligence that has been done. As Mr. Slifka said, there is also the additional $750,000 that will be on the Assembly agenda Tuesday night for a grant to Beans Cafe to fully complete the agreement with Rasmussen and Widener with the 3rd Avenue property. And then I will also say that depending on the outcome of the Alaska Club, there will also be additional earnest money that will have to be paid from that fund as well. So I would anticipate that there will be somewhere roughly around $10 million, depending on how some of those decisions are made.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Weddleton. I have another question from Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Mr. Bach instead. I saw though another appropriation for beans in the amount of 750,000 in the proposed use of the CDBG Community Development Block Grant and Home Funds, and then this one. So is it the administration's preference and position to utilize these funds, and that we'll see further refinement of those HUD related funds?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Zalato, yes, you are exactly right.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's all on AR 2021-204. If there's nothing, I see no other questions, so let's move on to item C, update on 2020 and 2021 budgets. Lance, looks like that's you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to give you folks a summary of what Mr. King was just mentioned that I gave to the Budget Advisory Commission a week ago. I'm hoping that I will be able to add the report for the year-end budget actuals on the addendum as an AIM, and so what I'd like to highlight before you get it is just kind of talk about how 2020 ended up. There's a couple nuances that I just want to verbalize now, and then as you read the report, you may have additional questions. But obviously, 2020 had a lot of nuances in it as it relates to our operating budget. One of those being our ability to use some of the CARES funds for first responder payroll. And so when we budgeted the particular departments, when you look at the year end of 2020 and the amount of labor budget that we had identified, which is right around $300 million out of our total budget, you'll recognize that only 70% of it was spent out of our operating budget. It's because we moved about $90 million into first responder payroll. So the departments actually spent the amount they were budgeted. It's just that they weren't using the operating dollars, they were using first responder payroll. That in and of itself actually resulted in some of the adjustments we made in the mill levies. So overall, the departments underspent, even with that into consideration in 2020. There's some adjustments that will need to be made in 2020, and then those are the things that you'll be seeing. When you see the report, you'll also recognize there's a few other departments that are going to look a bit of an anomaly. One of them being in the Office of Economic and Community Development, because a lot of those CARES funds were added as supplementals in 2020, but they weren't spent in 2020. So as a result, it looks like Mr. Schutte had a large balance. Well, that was to be expected because those dollars were not all spent in 2020, and the Assembly then moved them into 2021. But in order to accurately reflect how we ended up, it looks like that is why the non-labor portion of Chris's budget is going to be pretty big, as much money on the table. A couple of the other ones, obviously police and fire, it's going to look like their non-labor budgets were not completely spent. The operating, it's because we use first responder payroll. So we are explaining these in the document as well. I think the last couple pieces to point out would probably be in HR. And because as part of HR, when we sold ML&P, we put some of those proceeds into HR's budget in order to pay the PERS liability. And so not all of those dollars were all loaded in 2020, but they were not all spent, and we continue to meet that commitment. So the anomalies in 2020 are primarily a result you'll see in 5 or 6 departments, and they're all related to the benefits that we receive from the CARES funds. And again, you'll see them in police, fire, you'll see some in health. But when you see those in that way, you'll recognize that the reason is because of the application of the CARES funds and either using those departments as those places where we put the funds to be granted out. And again, any unspent funds were then rolled into fund balance, which when the Assembly then reallocated to those same programs in 21. So 2020 is going to look a little different because of that reason. I will say that when you look at the departments, irrespective of the source of the funds, on their labor budget, they spent about 99% of the total amount of labor budget that was afforded to them. And then on their non-labor, they were pretty much very, very close to 100% spent in 2020. You'll also see in the report that we had a lot of departments that were over in their overtime. In the year-end report to you in the overtime, the Assembly was slightly over a little bit. The fire department was over. HR was over quite a bit, and my office of management and budget, and our work to assist in making sure that CARES funds. Obviously, we had some from the municipal. The municipal manager, and that had to do. I mean, it didn't have much budget in there, and I think that was mostly tied to the Emergency Operations Center. So the things that went over in their overtime, they're primarily all related to the work, the extra work that was required and in overtime to manage those programs. And again, even with their overtime budgets spent, their total labor for the city was underspent. So compliments to the departments that did the best to manage that. And then you will see in the travel program, as I'm going to remind the Assembly, when we built the first quarter of 2020, Mayor Berkowitz and the administration made a decision at that time to basically eliminate all travel budgets. There were some departments that had spent some travel money, and they then, through their non-labor, they had the ability to manage that. But you're going to see in the travel budget itself, it looks like they were overspent, and in fact they were, because they'd spent some money and then we took literally their travel budget away. There was no other expenditures after the dollars were removed. So but the departments were able to absorb those overages in their other non-labor, so that's good. I'm going to stop there, Mr. Chairman, on the general government, and then I'm going to move on briefly to the utilities and enterprise. And again, this 2020 year-end budget to actuals, we're going to try and get that on for your information, and you'll get a chance to look at it. Alex's team has been working diligently to close the year, and we needed the Assembly to make some final actions, which you did in June on the adjustments to the MLMP dollars. And thank you for that. And we needed both of those things to occur in order to get this report finished. So we're moving to get to you as soon as we can. So
thank you, Lance. I don't see any questions on that. I do have just a small question. I wanted to make sure that all of the anomalies that you spoke to in terms of how that is articulated on the reports and to ensure that it doesn't create confusion for the public, are there things you would do because of just the number of anomalies on this particular report that would help those folks who are reading it to understand why they are there?
Yes, and we're actually, thank you, Mr. Chairman, excellent question. We're going to do our best to add some extra explanation in the Assembly information memorandum to explain particularly those 5 or 6 departments that look underspent. Again, police, fire, Office of Economic and Community Development, and a variety of others. So yes, we will make extra effort to explain those as well. Excellent question. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think for the utilities and enterprise, you're going to see a report to them, including municipal light and power for the portion of the year that was in there. I will say that, all of the utilities, knowing how they went into 2020, they knew that their revenues, or at least they projected their revenues, were going to be underspent. And when you see this report, I'll highlight a couple here. For example, the sewer utility, I mean, they came in very, very close to their original projections. They came in basically at a total of about 98%. They lowered their initial projections, and then they still came in very, very close. But similarly, they also reduced their expenditures. And so their revenues came in at 98 as an example, but their expenditures came in at 90. In pretty much every case, they did very close to their projections, and in almost every case, they actually underspent in their expenses, and which, again, a compliment to AWU. They did a fabulous job. They really knew what was coming, and they managed their expenses as best as they could. Merrifield did a similar thing. They had the benefit of some CARES funds that helped them through that process. So Merrifield ended 2020 in a really good position. Similarly, the port was a bit of a surprise. Their revenues came in about 5% better than they had originally intended, which was a compliment to them. And then their expenses were down. They underspent their amount of money, so they ended up in a positive situation. Solid Waste Services, I think their revenues actually came in a little better than projected. And with that, they spent a little bit more than they had projected. So they took that into account. And at the end of the year, they ended up in a positive situation on the disposal side. The refuse, similarly, their revenues were not as well, but their expenses were under. And so I think overall for the municipality and general government, as well as the utilities, 2020, given all of the pieces that we were working with and the changes that were unique, the general government ended, I think, they did very well. And then the utilities, my compliments to all of them. I think they did well, as better than I expected. And it just has to do with the management and those folks in those departments. So I'm glad to see the report turned out the way that it did. And again, we'll work to get this on, and we'll explain that as best we can. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Lance, and I just want to add my congratulations. It was a really challenging year, and so it's great to hear that we were able to stay within our budget to the degree that we did. So great. Let's move on to the MOA financial status. Mr. Slivka, looks like you're on for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I turn it over to Treasurer Dan Moore to talk a bit about revenue, just a couple of reminders. As Mr. Wilbur said, we're kind of in that period where we're just closing 2020 and we haven't really started closing the 2021. So our ability to see into the revenue for 2021 is limited. Additionally, we had the enormous benefit in years past of an employee who had been modeling and forecasting revenue for the MOA for many years in the form of Mr. Eric Larson, who retired at the end of February. We have not been able to yet replace him, and as such, our forecasting skills are much reduced. Additionally, as people are aware, the vast majority of revenue for the MOA comes in the form of property taxes, the first half of which we just received was due on Tuesday. So as we get into July and August, we should have a much better sense of where our revenue is. The other point, which I don't want people to lose sight of, is that the budget approved for 2021 assumed that we would recover $35 million from FEMA for money spent in response to the pandemic. Just to put that in perspective, I mean, that was $35 million at the end of 2020. Now we have spent in excess of $50 million. I will say that we did receive an $11 million payment last week, which is a step in the right direction, but we are fully focused for the next 6 months, working with the Office of Emergency Management and other departments to recoup as much of that from FEMA. And much of those delays, unfortunately, are due to the fact that, we had an emergency everywhere across the entire country, and FEMA didn't staff up, the state of Alaska didn't staff up. So response times that historically have been in the 2 to 4 week period are now stretched out into the 3 to 4 month period. So we are working on a very close schedule, but I just wanted to remind the Assembly that we are completely focused on that. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Moore.
Okay, thanks, Alex. This is Dan Moore, the city treasurer. Alex already sort of gave a good lead in. We do not have a complete picture at this point because of where we are in the year. We do have some postings in SAP that have lagged a bit. We know they normally would show up by now, but I think with the annual financial statement work being done, it's caused a little bit of a delay in some of those postings. So even just looking at SAP right now, we know we're not seeing everything that's actually there, and that will get caught up, I would imagine, within the next number of weeks. Anyway, so what I can do today is I can just, and I'll do this very in a quick way, but as I'll go through just some summary categories of revenue, just to verbally let you know kind of what I've seen so far. And the first one would be the property tax category. We did bill out mid-May the real property tax bills. As soon as that billing goes out, that all becomes posted revenue in SAP, and it's based on the net amount that's billed after exemptions are applied. So the total net billing of real property at the mid-May point, $560.5 million. That's property taxes in general are 60% of the total revenues. So that was a significant piece of information that basically tells us how most of the real property could shape up for the remainder of the year. And so when I compare that to the budget number for real property, it's about $1.5 million below that. So there's a slight shortfall. But considering it's $560.5 million that was billed, that's a really big number. $1.5 million out of that is a negative variance. It's not big percentage wise. The other category, second category, is in the investment revenue area. What I did is I received some information from the public finance division on the cash pool earnings, and I also looked at the MOE trust dividend, which is something I directly oversee, and the net of those two projections are right now really right at zero. So we're right on the budget when you combine both the cash pool earnings and the MOE trust dividend. The MOE trust dividend is quite predictable, should not vary much at all because it's formula driven. The cash pool earnings vary month to month because the market can be, quite volatile. So at this point in time, both those are going to come in really together right on budget. Another category is what I would call the non-property tax category. These are various types of taxes that are not property, so they're not real property, they're not personal property. The ones that we have the most information about are the ones that are filed monthly, and so that would be tobacco, marijuana, and fuel tax. And the good news here is when I look at normally how much we would have collected during the first 4 months of the year, actually it's through the first 4 reported months, we're actually ahead of where we have been both in 2020 and in 2019. So just a very rough estimate is tobacco, marijuana, and fuel tax combined, they could come in at $1.5 million or more above the budget. So that's positive news that kind of offsets what was said earlier about real property tax. Another area that's positive as a category is fine revenues. I believe with some of the federal money that was provided to people during the COVID period, it actually allowed people to pay down some of the amounts that they owed, and we saw an increase. That also was seen nationwide in other situations. So we're probably a couple $100,000 ahead when it comes to fine revenue collections. However, a big added piece to that later in the year will be the PFD. So our assumption, and what I think OMB budgeted on, is an assumption of a $1,000 PFD amount, and based on what's going on in the press, that could be less than $1,000. And so any type of positive revenue variance we have with fine revenue could become a negative revenue variance depending on how the PFD amount turns out later this year. The last major category is, I guess, actually, that was it according to my notes. What I wanted to do is point out certain types of revenues that we do not know much at all about because it is too early in the year. And that would be MISA payments. Those are payments in lieu of tax coming from the utilities. Another area would be personal property tax, which is not billed out till later in the year, in the late summer, early fall. And then the big ones that deal with tourism would be room tax and rental vehicle tax. So we don't have enough information at this point in the year to tell you how that's looking. We're hopeful that that it will be better than expected, but the budget already assumed we would have a half, like sort of a 50% recovery this year, and we'll see if we can meet that or hopefully do better. I already mentioned PFD. That's something that comes later in the year, and then there's seasonal revenues such as Parks and Rec that rise up quite a bit during the summer months, but we don't know what those are until they actually occur. The last thing I wanted to share with the committee, and so far everything I've talked about are general government operating revenues. That's kind of the main budgeted revenues. There is a separate, and I believe this Lance and OMB can correct me, but there's a separate fund that is a dedicated fund specific to alcohol tax. And I believe the Assembly, I've tried every time we have these meetings to let you know how that's going. There is good news on that front. We've had 3 reported monthly filings for February through April, and we've collected $2.67 million. We're 106% of the midpoint projection that we made early on, and that was back when Eric Larson was here. He helped to project what he thought the alcohol tax might come in month by month, and it builds in seasonality. And so he had projected the midpoint target after 3 months would be X dollars, and I think we're a couple $100,000 ahead of that. We're 106% ahead of that. So that's good news. I mean, we're hoping to be able to fully realize what is budgeted for alcohol tax this year, and so far it's definitely on track. So that's the summary of my report. I hope by the time we get to the next meeting, I can provide more in writing, and it will come to you in writing as everything gets a little bit more concrete. But we are in a state of flux right now. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dan. That was my request, is that to the degree that you can provide even a set of talking points based on what you've already reported, that would be great, especially for those of us that want to bring that information to community council. So whatever you can provide and whenever you can provide it, that would be great. It looks like I have a hand up from Jason. Did you want to add something to the conversation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I stepped away very briefly while Dan was going through there, so I apologize if he hit this, but 2 points that I wanted to make. The first is as it relates to community assistance. I believe, and Dan can correct me if I'm off base on these numbers, we budgeted a much lower amount this year based on what we received last year. However, in the budget that has been approved so far, it actually would increase the community assistance number back up to what it was 2 years ago, which I believe would be a net positive of somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million. And then the second is originally there was 100% of the school bond debt reimbursement that was included in the budget as well. However, as a result of the legislature not being able to get 3 Republican votes in the House and 2 additional Republican votes in the Senate, that number will be reduced significantly again unless they address it during one of their special sessions later in the summer. So the hope would be that they figure that out, but if not, it looks like next year will be another large contribution from the municipality to cover the state's portion of school bond debt reimbursement.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Dan. All right. It looks like there are no questions in the queue at this point. So we're going to move on to a quarterly update on pay audits. Susie, are you on with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just so I'll do a little reminder of like why we're having this conversation. Payroll audits. So the goal of the payroll audits is to review all payroll corrections submitted since we went live with SAP, which was 9/11/2017. So we are double checking that the payroll correction was completed without error. We're providing employees and unions with a complete audit per person, which is quite extensive. And where we are now, we are at an average pay correction per cycle is less than 10 pay corrections per cycle. So before SAP, there was an average of 50. So we've improved at this point. So just kind of letting that happen. I would say that since we met last, we've completed 90 new audits. And we expect our new group, so those were audits with APDEA. And the audits priority and selection is being done with legal, labor, and the unions. So they are the ones who are directing who gets audited next. And our next group we expect to be is a group of APDEA active employees of about 73. So that's our next batch. Then I just kind of wanted to let you know that on we did do a deep dive in trying to do an analysis on all of our pay corrections. We could do from January through April. There were a total of 145 pay corrections during that time period, and none of these pay corrections were due to system errors. They were things like acting pay was not coded on the time card. Holiday pay was reported incorrectly. Shift differential not entered correctly on the time card. They're expected. This is like normal course of business errors. So, but what they aren't are system errors. So we're very happy to brag about that at this moment. That's what I got. So end of report, unless you have questions.
Thank you, Susie. It does not appear that I have questions at this time.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. So it's somewhat unrelated, but Susie, I wanted to thank you on a project that we've been working on for a very long time, which is an access to records project, is coming very close to fruition. And I know your team has put in a lot of work and in making it successful. So I'm very grateful and looking forward to it being rolled out as soon as we can.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, it was uploaded yesterday, so I haven't checked on the status today. So we're
very exciting. Great work for your team.
Thank you. And thanks for all your contributions and guidance.
All right. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Susie. We have gotten through our agenda at this point. And I'll just open the floor if there's any other business we need to discuss before we go on to the next section. I don't see anything in the queue. Are there? Well, let's just. I'm going to skip legislative priorities, but we do have a little bit of time before we move on to audience for participation. Do members want to share any budget items at this point for 2022? Is there any folks that want to speak up in that area?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Crystal.
Go ahead.
I think you might have Meg Zolotel in the queue, and then I have something as well, just to ask.
Great. Yep. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Meg, you're up.
Thank you. So one of my requests with regard to the budget for 2022 is if the administration could flag particularly those positions that were paid for with one-time funding, either through CARES Act well, probably CARES Act or any other one-time funding, because I believe there were quite a few, particularly in the health department, and I would like to get those kind of on my radar at least sooner than later as we move through the next couple of months and then into the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Do you want the administration to respond, or you just want to leave that for them to consider?
It's just a request for information at either a coming meeting would probably be a helpful time to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks. Miss Kennedy. Oh, I'm sorry. Jason, did you want to respond?
That was Lance.
Oh, Lance, sorry. Go ahead.
Ms. Alatel, thank you for the question. We actually already have that in as a list of items to do, and in that list, we'll also suggest in that list how we anticipated those one-time positions would either purposely wholly been have one time, or if they were one time this year, how they would be covered with ongoing revenue in 2022. So we'll add that to the list of positions so that you can consider that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I guess, is in this year's budget, and there may be something coming forward Tuesday that I just haven't seen yet. But I asked the question last week about the potential for administrative transition funds, and the answer I got was there was no awareness of that. But I think since other information has come forward, and I've seen some information about transition funds that have been allocated to incoming mayoral candidates. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to get an update on where we're at with that, and particularly where that funding actually comes from, should we approve its allocation. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, Assembly Member Kennedy, I'll take a first crack at this, and then if I get anything wrong, I will let Lance clean up. But I do want to, I think, correct, some of the information that is getting out there. I think many people are correct that in the past, there were budget items that indicated mayoral transition. However, the vast majority of those funds were not turned over to the incoming administration, and I'll tell you why. Typically, in any changeover of administrations, the mayor's office is alone in that pretty much 100% of the individuals working in that department, that is the mayor's office, leave. They are not asked to stay with a new administration. So what does that do to the mayor's office budget? Well, the biggest is that because there are upwards of between 8 to 10 individuals that have a job on June 30th and then no longer have one on July 1st, is the municipality has to cash out all of those employees' cashable leave. So historically, what has been done is the amount has been set aside for mayoral transition. But like I said, the vast majority of those funds have gone to pay the leave cash out of all of that department that is exiting. I will say that this year, the reason why that request was not written down in any first quarter budget item is because I worked with the Office of Management and Budget, to include Lance and Marilyn, very closely throughout the first part of the year to ensure that the mayor's office budget that was approved by the assembly not only had at least a half a year's budget left so that the new administration had a full half-year budget, but also that we had enough funds because I knew that there were a number of individuals that were going to be leaving the position, their current positions a little early, and we weren't going to be filling those positions from, say, probably I had a few folks in the mayor's office leave in March. Well, those have been empty PCNs, but have still been budgeted. So with that, I was able to ensure that we didn't have to come back to the assembly for a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $30,000 or $60,000 in the past. Now, the other aspect that I will add is that, again, in the past, there have been a handful of new administration employees that they intend to make full-time employees, municipal employees, on July 1st that we bring on as contractors so that they can begin to be paid and they can set up an email address and begin doing at least some of the initial work. Again, they don't have any authority to do anything until July 1st, but certainly, again, if that is something that the Bronson administration is interested in pursuing and bringing on a handful of individuals that would be contractors up until July 1st, again, I will say, we have enough money in the current mayor's office budget because of the way that I have budgeted and managed this budget through the first half of the year, that is entirely doable. So with that, happy to answer any additional questions, but I also want to turn it over to Mr. Wilbur to see if I missed anything or if he had anything to add.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Bach. Instead, I will add that one of the things that we have done is we wanted to make sure and verify while we knew that Jason had been managing the budget in the mayor's office, and we wanted to know if we had the ability to support the incoming administration, how much money might we have available, and how would we actually do it. And I mean, I do think at this time I think we probably have at least probably $25,000 in labor that we can just move to a non-labor account, and then that non-labor account can be applied to the contract, as Mr. Bockenstead alluded to, and we can continue to support that team. It's in working with Mr. Bockenstead to verify how much money they actually had to move. And the reason that was important was for two reasons. One, when we look at the first half of the year, as Mr. Bockenstead and has managed the staff, knowing who was going to be leaving, recognizing the amount of leave cash out, verifying that to up to at least at the end of May, how much money would we have in the first half of the year to contribute to that transition? Therefore, then making sure that the second half of the year, starting July 1 through December 31st, is not influenced or reduced through this action, so that any contribution to the incoming administration would only impact the first half of the year. It would not influence or impact the mayor's budget for the second half of the year as the assembly's approved. So I think a resolution is not necessary, in my opinion. I think we have the ability and the means to start that process soon, and I think Mr. Bockenstead, with his support, that we will implement that. We will make the budget transfer to an amount that he agrees to, and we will then set up that account. We'll reach out to the Bronson administration or have Mr. Bockenstead do that, and we can be on our way and support them as best as we possibly can to make it a seamless transition. And I think our role is to make sure that whatever number is picked, that office can afford. Picking a number for any department to direct it without verifying that it's actually there, I don't think that's the wisest role. And we have been able to verify that they do have some dollars that we can transfer there. I think at this point, Mr. Bockenstead could safely move $25,000. We could probably even move 30. But I can follow up with him. But that is an excellent question, Ms. Kennedy. I know that there's been some conversations in the past. I will be straight up that we have been working to get the ARPA funds put together, and just got to this one here on Monday. So excellent question. We have a solution, and I hope we can move forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy, for a great question.
Ms. Kennedy, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I just want to say thank you. I mean, that was all a really good, thorough explanation, and it is an interesting process, but I really do appreciate the information, and just I want to say thank you. So thank you, Mr.
Great.
Chair.
Thanks. And I also have Mr. Weddleton in the queue. Mr. Weddleton?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to follow up on that a bit more. So, and I really appreciate that explanation. That totally wasn't what I think many of us, certainly me, were thinking happened with transition funds. But it seems to me, going back, that when Sullivan came in, that I don't know if he was paid or there was an expectation that he was. I don't know if it's in code or was it tradition that the mayor could start getting paid, upon certification or something like that, but during the transition time. So, I mean, that speaks to there actually being cash going towards, the incoming mayor. Is that vague memory wrong?
So through the chair, this is Lance at Office of Management Budget. Mr. Weddleton, I believe you are correct. I think I think Miss Jones and the clerk has advised us, at least I was made aware that if that is the case, I think it would start sometime at the beginning of June. I don't know the exact date, but we, in our calculation and our analysis that we gave Mr. Bach instead, we made an assumption that if we did have that ability, we included at least a month of salary to the incoming mayor if that is in fact a code requirement. So that's cushion in there that we've already calculated based on some guidance that we got from Ms. Jones. So even accounting for that, we have the ability to help them.
Okay, can I follow up?
Yes.
Cameron? So I guess just more broadly then, how is the transition going? Have you had people from the transition team coming into your office, looking at the budget, learning how things work? We're getting pretty close to July 1. How are we going to be well set when the change happens?
I'll start, and then I'll let Mr. Bach instead or Mr. Slifka jump on, because we've been active in it. I will say I've really been Anna Henderson, the municipal manager, as well as Alex, have been receiving a lot of questions. And I think to answer your direct question, Mr. Weddleton, I think it's going well. And I think it's going well for a couple reasons. One, we're getting some really good questions, and I think just basic information that we've provided the public, some budget information, status of information that we have provided to the assembly. We're just corralling that pieces. They send us requests. We're responding to them. We're getting rapid responses from department heads. I know that there are separate teams. There is a separate budget team. There's a separate transportation team. I know Mr. Dole over in Development Services has had special meetings with members. And we're being very open and very responsive to our requests as best and fast as we possibly can. I think I think you would have to ask Mr. Baker, Mr. Campbell, Ms. Frasca, and the others who have been contacting us. I know Susie in IT was really right off the bat helping them get set up with the technology that they needed, and really making sure that they got the appropriate access. We've been working through agreements and processes for information that they need for hiring, and keeping that separate and confidential as is required. I think it's going well, and I think we're helping them the best that they can, and they're going to have as much information as we can feed them. And but it's been consuming a lot of time, but I also think it's definitely time well spent. So I'll end there and let other execs weigh in if they have additions to add. Thank you.
We have about 4 minutes left in our meeting. Jason, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think he did a great overview of how the transition is going.
Great. And Mr. Weddleton, did that complete your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, we do have a few minutes left in the meeting, and so I do want to create a little bit of space for audience participation. We probably would only be able to get 1 or 2 in.
Hello.
Yes. Go ahead and state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. Follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, the decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. My first remarks are going to be what was discussed toward the latter part of this meeting, the transition. The municipality established in 1975. We're in 2021 right now. Where is the transition plan out there? I'm hearing a rather unstable situation in the transition. I'm not doubting that you have been involved in trying to deal with the transition, but one would think that since the Municipality Bank was established in 1975 and now we're in 2021, there would be a written document and to go by and change over the course of time when situations do change. And what we don't have here is any indication. I missed the first 10 minutes of this meeting, that particular document. And that's a concern. Second is this, this is dealing with financials. And you continue to have a situation of this important situation dealing with the financial situation of the Municipality of Anchorage. And these reports, I respect them, but they're orally. They're not in writing, not written, and it's not on the website as far as for this committee meetings. The only thing there is dealing with legislation that's stated for June 8th for reading. And that is not proper because both the public and the assembly needs to follow with what you're saying, and the best thing to have it in writing leads to a confusing situation both by the public and the assembly, and the end result is not getting a clear picture of the physical soundness of the Municipality of Anchorage. But I'll close with this last remark. I do appreciate those people who have been doing these presentations over the course of time. They're doing a remarkable job, what I see, but the fact is we need to have that in document form so we can follow and we can respond, both public and assembly. And that concludes my time with 44 seconds to spare.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. I apologize, Mr. Constant. I did not see you in the queue. Did you want to make a comment in the last minute of the meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Previously, the item we were talking about was transition funding, and I just wanted folks to know that I've done a bit of investigation, and in 2009, there were funds established for a transition fund that were transmitted to the Sullivan administration. In 2015, for the most part, the Sullivan administration utilized the transition funds to pay the one-time benefits that Mr. Bach had mentioned are an expense. And so the only expenses that were covered in that time frame were 3 contracted staff who were brought on and some computers and internet service. So what we have coming before us on Tuesday will be a resolution to approve a $60,000 fund out of the mayor's office budget for them to choose how they would spend funds. But I do understand that the payroll issue for the mayor is being addressed internally, not through this process. So I've been able to find records for 2009, but not 2016 or 15. And I just wanted to put that in the record.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constant. And with that, we are at 2 o'clock. And I want to thank everybody for the presentations. Thank you to all the people that presented, and thank you for attending today. And this meeting is now adjourned. Have a nice day.